I am officially bulletproofed. Yes, that's why my skin is glowing and I'm looking ripped and jacked. It's because every morning I take my mycotoxin-free bulletproof coffee and mix it up with MCT oil and grass-fed butter. Why, do you ask? Well, it does a lot of things. It replaces my meal for the morning, and it gets my brain all the right nutrients they need, those oils, that fat, and then I don't eat until 1 or 2 o'clock. So it's not really just coffee, it's turning into a lifestyle.
You know, James is a writer, and you are aspiring to write a book. And you just said that you wrote from the first person point of an American woman. And how do you do something like that, or how do you even advise people of how they can become that character? It seems very hard.
It's kind of weird, but a lot of people do that kind of thing. You know, they have this idea for a character that's kind of nothing like them. And I think that for me, I had to kind of I had to write quite close to my comfort zone before I could kind of move out a little bit. And but it's funny. It's like so much of it with characters, I always find so much of it is kind of superficial. Like, you know, like gender and social class and nationality. It's like it's the kind of spirit and the essence of the character of the human being that really comes out, hopefully, when you try and write and you try and do that, you know. And then after that, once you've got the character down, you're basically just trying to authenticate it with details. And it's just a lot of research and listening to people and like giving it to Americans to read, basically, and saying, what do you think of this? What's working? What's not? What's kind of, you know, and just doing as much of that as you possibly can, yeah.
Did you have? I mean, could you have written this book if you hadn't lived in Chicago the last 3 years?
Probably not. It would have been. I don't think I would have had the desire to do it, and because it's set in Miami, and it's more Miami than Chicago. Okay. That inspires me to write. I mean, I love living in Chicago, but I feel that it's an old kind of city, and I feel that it's kind of ossified in terms of. All the cultural relationships. I mean, people. I go to. There's the guys I go to drinking with. You know, the guys I go to the boxing with. The guys I go to the cinemas with, and all that. You know, and it's like there's a different crowd. You know, but everybody has a place, and they know where everything is. Whereas Miami, it's just such a kind of mixed up town. Everybody comes in there, and I thought, well, I've got a kind of place here. I mean, my kind of view of it is probably as good as any other incomers, but. Not like that in Chicago. I mean, there's so many good writers that are so much steeped in, you know, there's so much steeped in the traditions of Chicago that it would be impossible for me to kind of catch up with that. But not in Miami. There's no real traditions in Miami. It's just, everything is just new. You know, everything is just kind of up for grabs.
Miami's insane.
Yeah, that's what I thought you were. I thought that's where you lived in Miami. You were there for some point?
I've got a place in Miami as well, and Chicago's awfully cold in the winter, James.
In
the winter, like, you know.
So I lived in Chicago.
Too much like Scotland.
Yeah, I lived
in
Chicago for 2 years.
You want to trade up in the weather. You know,
yeah, I can imagine. I worked for a bank in Chicago for 2 years, and I love Chicago, and I love the people in Chicago. But if I would have told you one city that Irvine Welsh lives in, I would have been like, not Chicago, because it's not what you'd say a dynamic city. There are these kind of relationships that, you know, this is the way it's been for a long time, and this is the way it's been, and it's kind of Midwest. And for the Midwest, it's one of the best cities for the Midwest, but it's not exactly dynamic. Is that the right word?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's changed a lot in the last 3 years since I've been there, and I think that it's probably changed a lot at the expense of a lot of the other towns in the Midwest, like Detroit and Minneapolis and Cincinnati, Milwaukee, because it's become more of a regional capital. You know, you tend to get a lot of people flooding from these towns into Chicago now. Whereas in Chicago, the only place you want to go if you want to kind of make it, whatever that is, means like, you know, you go to New York or LA, but so many people regionally come to Chicago. You know?
What is your writing process? How do you write?
I usually work on lots of different things at once, and then I get to a critical mass with something. I think this is the thing I've got to go with. And that's the kind of horrible bit, you know, the rest is just procrastination and fun, you know, you're building something up. I think, I've really got to make this actually happen. It's got to be a book, or it's got to be a screenplay. I can't just ponce around with it anymore. I've got to turn it into that, you know. And that's the horrible part, because that's when it becomes like real work. You just go, you know, so then the regime becomes completely different. It's not about just getting up and doodling away and having fun and all that. It's about just thinking about, mapping off the days and the weeks and the months and all that, and saying, this is my deadline I'm going to set, and this is how I'm going to do that, and getting up on the wall and saying, this is the first act, this is the second, this is the third, this is all my little charts and diagrams, and kind of going back.
So you do that like almost
yeah,
like
yeah,
a military operation.
Yeah, no, it is. It's crime watch basically.
It must be. It must be.
It is real, especially with the characters. It's like a police. It becomes like a police operating room. You go in there.
Do you have like pictures of the characters or descriptions?
Yeah,
of the
I do
characters?
have pictures, descriptions. I mean, I do not so much pictures, but I do drawings. I can do little sketches of people. How I imagine the person to look like.
Like really to bring them to, literally to bring them to life.
Bring them to life, and I make up a tape for every one of them. I make up a playlist, what they're going to listen to, and have that on when I'm writing the character.
Wow, that's pretty interesting.
That's brilliant.
Well, I think you make them. To me, it's like you make them more real, and it's. I think the thing about writing is it's such a kind of weird thing because you're spending all this time in a room with people that don't exist. I mean, that's a great definition of insanity, isn't it? It's a perfect working definition of insanity. And I think that, the only evidence you've got that it exists are these kind of little things you've written about them on the walls, or the drawings of them, or the kind of the tapes you've made about them. And I think to make them really real and to make them come to life on the page, I think you have to go into that kind of detail.
Really under the microscope.
Yeah, really get into it. Really get into it as much
I
as you
think
can.
people, that discerning reader, they know when something's real. And like when they see the movie, they know that there's reality in those characters, and that's what they buy into. And I think the consuming public is a lot more intelligent than most people give credit. I think.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because it's kind of like what you see, the kind of Hollywood blockbusters where you have your hero and the villain, and you get the girl, and a lot of people are just spoon-fed this, and do they watch it because that's the only thing they've got to watch, and then something
Well, they've got to make it back in the first weekend.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it's saturation, it's publicity, it's kind of saturation, PR saturation, to make sure all that money that the studio spent comes back on that weekend. Because as soon as word of mouth kicks in and people go like, oh, it's all right, it's not great,
Right.
That's the film dead. It's like the second week. It's gone.
Yeah.